So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome very much to this lunchtime webinar, our Lunch and Learn from the Supply Chain Sustainability School. My name is Dave Emery. I'm a consultant with the school. My particular areas of interest are in offsite construction and digital construction. So today's event, I think, is particularly interesting for me, at least, because we're going to hear from our guest speaker two stories in one, really. So James Ahesi from JLG Group is going to talk to us about a journey he and his colleagues embarked on, which had wide-ranging and quite unexpected results. In seeking to improve the efficiency in one aspect of their business, they found that not only were they able to virtually eliminate an overhead that up to then had not been very visible, but in doing so, they also came up with a way of supplying far more comprehensive and useful data to their customers and indeed the wider industry. As you'll hear from James, the company has gone from one that was somewhat at arm's length from the ultimate users of their products to one where the data they now supply is, in some cases, actually influencing the designs of new building projects. The second layer in James's story is about the benefits the company has enjoyed that were not anticipated at the outset, some of which I think it's true to say are so significant that they may well influence some of the company's future strategies. So the JLG Group, it's an American-owned company that describes itself as the world's leading designer and manufacturer of access equipment. Now, you may not be familiar with JLG since their products are sold almost exclusively to plant hire companies rather than to contractors. Now, as the Supply Chain School's resident offsite construction specialist and also digital construction specialist, JLG Group really interests me personally. It seems to me that as the industry moves more and more towards offsite and modern methods of construction, companies like JLG will have a significant role to play in supporting the way our buildings are delivered and maintained. And in terms of digital construction, you'll hear from James in a minute how JLG's digital innovations are transforming their place in the market and potentially their future direction. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest speaker, James Ahesi from JLG Group. So James, tell us a little bit about your background and your role at JLG.
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. My background is quite varied, actually. I've been very fortunate to work in several different areas, often at the same time. At the moment, I work in everything from telematics and connected construction to, as we'll hear a bit later, BIM. I even get involved in the production line from time to time, which is pretty fun. But I've worked in structural analysis before. I come from a science background, physics, but I've always loved machinery. Taking them apart, I've gotten progressively better at putting them back together again over the years. I still have some work to do.
Thanks, James. And I did touch on what the company is, but tell us a bit more about the company, JLG Group.
Yeah, sure. JLG was founded in 1969. We celebrated our 50th anniversary when I worked for the company, which was kind of cool. When our founder created the first cherry picker, he reputedly saw people working in some scaffolding and thought there's got to be a better way. And that basically created the powered access industry, which we've led since the beginning. We're also part of Oshkosh Corporation, which is we refer to as the mothership. And we have many sister companies that make personnel carriers for zones of conflict, to blingy fire trucks that you see in films and all kinds of things. It's great.
Wow. What about some of the more day-to-day products? Could you give us a sense of the range of products that you make for the industry?
We start off at the very small, actually. The company nearest to where I'm based, the office I use, it's called Power Towers, where we make low-level access equipment. Some are push around, they go up to 1 story or sometimes up to a 2nd story internal use, all the way up to our very largest machines, which are 56 meters or 185 feet. They're huge things. We make telehandlers, sometimes known as TMH, or they'd be primarily used for brownfield sites And we make some that lift up to 5 tons capacity, which we're hoping we'll see a bit more use when it comes to offsite manufacturing. Be ideal for putting finished assemblies onto trucks and whatnot.
Yeah. I noticed from talking to you in the lead up to this event, James, you as a company, you've got as many TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, as any company I've ever come across. So, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
What I wanted to talk to you about today was you discovered an inefficiency in your business, didn't you? That actually was costing you so much money. I think you actually started to describe it as a hidden factory or cost center.
Yeah.
Based on people who were asking you for information and the way you supplied it. Do you want to talk about that? And I think probably this is the appropriate moment for you to begin a slide share.
Well, for everyone that's in attendance, I fear not, it won't be death by PowerPoint. We wanted to spare you that this time. So I did this instead. It's like a visual journey through what we did, and we'll touch on each of them as we go along. But to your question, David, we began by looking at the industry through the lens of our own business. And in 2017, our group went through some pretty substantial changes. And at the time, myself and my boss, Neil, we were given the freedom to look at the construction industry. As part of that, we looked at some of the things our business was doing for the construction industry. And we found that there was a lot of demand for 2D and 3D models of our machines, largely by people who were asking for 1s and 2s. They were trying to plan something. Can we fit this in here? Will it go through the door? How many machines can we fit on a truck, etc., for transport? But there was no centralized system to provide these. And our team were doing these in 1s and 2s across the business. There could have been 20 or 30 people doing them. And each person was unaware of the others. And that's what you refer to as the hidden factory. It's a Six Sigma term that I learned from Neil at the time. And it's basically something that's going on that is not really accounted for anywhere, that no one gets a pat on the back for. And we thought there's got to be a better way. We estimated, I should say, that it was costing the company about $180,000 a year and about 3,300 hours for our personnel and team members. And that was a pretty big impetus to get going and do something that could fix this problem.
I do empathise with that. I occasionally jump in with a few tales of my own experiences. I had a modular construction company client once, and when I first arrived at their offices, the process for finding a drawing was to imagine who in the office might have last received an email with that drawing attached, go to that person's Outlook, do the search and find the drawing. But then, of course, to be sure that that was the latest, you had to do the same to the other 6 computers in the office because there was no even a drawing registration system. So this sort of inefficiency in an office environment is very close to my heart. I'm sorry, James, I interrupted. So your solution, we haven't dropped the BIM acronym in yet, but I think probably now is where it's going to come in.
Yeah. So as part of looking at what all these 1s and 2s were looking for, we had been aware of what BIM was in the construction industry, but at the time we didn't really think it was for us. We didn't think it was anything to do with us. And then we started speaking to some people, and we found that progressive companies, this is 3 or 4 years ago now, some of the more progressive companies wanted to plan to make sure that they could actually build the building in getting it right first time, as much as possible at least. And they were looking for machinery models in BIM so that they could plan getting it off the truck, through the gate, kind of traverse the site, get to where it needs to be, and then do the job as well. And can the building accommodate it? And we went back to our 2D and 3D drawing requests. And although they were all different to each other, when we did a little bit of analysis, we found that we could embody answers to all of them within one set of information. And that's when we came back to BIM. He said, well, let's combine this requirement with BIM. And then that was our 2 birds with 1 stone, really, that we satisfied the need for 2D and 3D drawings and entered into the BIM world.
And that's a great innovation in itself, but I know from personal experience it can bring all sorts of difficulties. Some of the work I've done in the past is trying to be the link between, on the one hand, the tier one contractor, and on the other hand, the supplier or manufacturer or product maker, in trying to understand exactly what's required, what is the data that we need to embed in those BIM models, what's useful, what's extraneous. So how did you grapple with those issues, James?
We were very fortunate to make contact with a couple of people who were very happy to share what they were doing and the struggles that they had. You know, these people are innovators themselves. You know, they're always pushing the boundaries of what can we do? Can we do things better? You know, how can we increase the certainty that this will happen the way we expect it to happen? And they were very keen to show us the work that they'd done, and we were very keen to hear it. And one particular example, we spent some time with them in their office. They invited us down. They were very generous, made lots of cups of tea, and I could shadow them, you know, sit beside them as they were working through their problems, and noted down some of the challenges they had, and some of them we could solve with our models. And we continued a great working relationship with them as we developed our prototype models, all the way up to the final ones that you see today.
I think on your diagram there, where you know, this question is how many birds could you kill with one stone? I guess that was the decision, the basis of your data decisions.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it in a cold and heartless way, it was purely financial. But I think it's better to look at it as that was the thing that piqued their interest. We thought, whoa, what's going on here? There's more to this than meets the eye. And when we combined it with what we'd looked at in BIM, we thought we can actually solve our unaccounted for time consumption and cost consumption, with all while offering a new service to people who need it, that the industry we felt was going to go in that direction anyway. So that was, yeah, definitely two birds with one stone.
And those people that you could help, I'm thinking, were not necessarily BIM stakeholders.
Some of them were, but a lot were not. We thought, you know, so this is obviously mechanical engineers trying to understand construction. So a lot of the people who are on the call are far more informed than I am about it. But we were really looking at it thinking architects will be interested in this, civil engineers will be interested in this, construction planners, even down to logistics managers. But as we went through the BIM project, and as we started to speak to people and started to work more with the people who were looking for these 2D and 3D models, we found that there was actually a huge demand for 3D models that were well dimensioned and representative, well outside of BIM. We ended up with some fantastic examples that, I guess it wasn't a hidden factory, it was the exact opposite. It was this hidden oasis of stuff that was happening that we hadn't really realized was there.
Does this explain to me what you mean by this breaking down of traditional industry barriers? Because I think that's probably the crossover point for you, wasn't it? Finding out what a wide range of potential beneficiaries there were from you doing something.
Yes, differently. Of course, yeah. I think we all know that industries are siloed. It's not just the construction industry, it's the industry I work in, even in our own company and lots of others. We're working to break down silos of knowledge, that there's a silo for one department, a silo for another, but speaking across those departments is sometimes a challenge, let alone going from one business to, or one industry to another. And as you alluded to earlier, our company doesn't have traditional long-standing relationships with the wider construction groups, largely because, as you mentioned as well, our machines are primarily owned by plant hire companies, or rental companies sometimes referred to. And they are the people that the construction industry interacts with for our machinery. We have a pretty good example from myself and Neil visited a construction site in London. And you know, we went through all the security, got in, we had our hard hats on, and got into the internal offices, and we were meeting with a bunch of people from this company. And just as we were taking our seat in the boardroom on site, the health and safety manager chimes across and says, so who are you? Who is JLG? And Neil stood up looked out the window and said, you see all those orange and green things, that's us, you know. But from their perspective, they, as far as they were concerned, it was the rental company's machine or the plant hire machine. They hadn't dealt with us, you know. That's who they called to get the machines. So there was a low awareness of us, but also we had a relatively low awareness of them. And these industry barriers were, I suppose, they were actually easier to break down than I thought they would be. That once we found the right people, they were really willing to tell us the problems that they were trying to overcome and show us the ways that they were trying to advance how these things are being used. And yeah, it was fascinating project to be part of.
Question popped up from one of our attendees, James. I didn't hear you use the word. What is meant by lib in create lib of models? I think I know the answer. Have we got to that part yet?
It's library of models.
Library, yeah.
I struggle to fit the words inside the light bulb, so forgive me for abbreviating.
Oh, I see. Ah, there it is. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's up here.
Library.
Library.
Yeah, common term for a collection of BIM objects or BIM resources is a library. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if there are people who are familiar with Revit, that's probably more familiar known as a family, maybe. But yeah, mm-hmm. Generic BIM terms, library. So I think you wanted to talk to me about. You've now in your head created a kind of ecosystem. Is that a fair description? Understanding the wider reach and influence of what you do.
Yeah, as when we look back to the way the construction industry was, say, when our company was founded, or even in, you know, up to the last 25 or 30 years, that many industries were advancing. They were changing to automation in industry, but construction relied on more traditional approaches for a long time. But it's modernizing much faster than any of the other industries, even though it's had a later beginning or later start to this transition. But as we've seen that the needs have changed, but how those needs propagate through the ecosystem are not necessarily keeping up with the modernizing of the industry overall. And as we look at the way things are today, you know, the ecosystem is a common term, but however you want to refer to it, whether it's a stakeholder map, an influencer map, or ecosystem, or whatever term you choose, there are now people who can pass their influence much wider in the ecosystem than ever before through the use of technology. And we see that in our own case, we provide the machines, we manufacture the machines for the rental company that goes on to be used by a subcontractor and an end user in an application. And traditionally, the principal contractor, the main contractor, tier one suppliers may not have had any say in what machine that is, and maybe they didn't really care. But now with the digital transformation, we see that more people can benefit from knowing what machines are doing, what they look like, will they fit, can we do these calculations to make sure that when they arrive on site, you know, they can fit through the door, get around the corner, go through the tunnel, and end up at the job site, and then do the job correctly as well. The now connected construction in the use of digital systems means that their influence can be cast much wider, which means that we are now aware that we will be influenced. We are already being influenced, and more people care about the information from our models than ever before.
It was interesting, I think I mentioned to you, James, that in some of the work we've been doing with our digital project, we've been talking to plant hire companies about telematics, which in my naivety, I thought were electronics that prevented machines bumping into each other or knocking down buildings. I hadn't realized until relatively recently how much information can be gained through telematics from the in-use fuel consumption, emissions, even to actually accurately drive diggers to the right point on the right site. So I think if you that embedded design data in your plant models will be hugely valuable in the design and planning of construction projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to also be involved in the JLG telematics project. It's called Clear Sky And being able to look at it from, I guess, an industrial way of thinking of plan, do, check, act, that you can plan using the BIM models, do it using the machine, check what has been done using the telematics, and then take corrective action if required, or just say, yeah, we're on target for today. Maybe that's that'll be the subject of another lunch and learn.
Yeah, I think you in manipulating and trying to disseminate lots of data to lots of different stakeholders, you've probably come across the perennial problem, which is one of you call it ontology, but it's actually how do we consistently and correctly describe components in a digital world. Tell us a bit about some of your experiences and difficulties there.
Yeah, so for anyone who's very keen on philosophy, this is probably a loose interpretation of what the word ontology means. But for us, it's the closest word we can get to describe it. And the best example I can think of really is, you know, we as the manufacturer, we describe our machine as a JLG EC450AJ. And we say it can go 15 meters up, that it can take two people and up to 250 kilos in the platform, and that's 4-wheel drive. But when we get to somebody on the construction side, for example, an end user, they use completely different terms to describe exactly the same machine. They want to know, will the machine get to a 3rd story? They want to take themselves and another operator and some cladding panels and be able to deal with a brownfield site or a rough terrain. And they were describing exactly the same thing, but using totally different language. So it's, in some ways, we speak different languages because we didn't need to speak to each other before, historically. But now that we do need to speak to each other, as the influence of each stakeholder gets wider and wider, we have to learn how to speak another language. And that's where we came up with this idea of ontology. It was a realization early on I'm grateful for, and it really just opened my eyes up for how we can be more interactive, but also have more successful conversations. That I can understand what it must be like if you're in a construction company. You got some guy coming in from a manufacturer, they want to talk to you about something, about promises maybe that may never see the light of day, and new products, etc. And they're talking a different language. They're not, you know, it's easy to tune out if you're not on the same frequency. But with the ontology, by doing some research ahead of time and trying to learn how people refer to certain things, but also what motivates them, you know, what motivates a decision, what motivates somebody to change to an electric machine. You know, is it a regulation? Is it a local law? Is it quietness? Whatever. It really opened up a lot, and it's so much so that it's now central to all of the projects I've worked on since BIM. Even though I learned it on this, it's been a real eye-opening moment when we came across that.
So I think the story so far is that, you know, you've identified a problem, a financial leak, if you like, in the business, which you've fixed. That's led you to further benefits, and I'm sure most of those are completely measurable, so you can measure your return on your time invested. It seems to me like you are beginning to potentially open more markets or change the perception of what your company can offer. I, for one, can imagine that many of our tier 1 partners are under great pressure always to reduce and track their carbon footprint. Would be really interested to know at design stage what would be the impact of plant and machinery. So I think there's some clear advantages there. I think that you talk quite a lot about some of the benefits that have come about innovation like this that you hadn't anticipated, but actually might turn out to be even more significant than the ones that you did hope.
Yeah. We're, some of my colleagues that are based here in this country, but also some that are based elsewhere around the world, are working on electrifying machines, and we found a lot of benefits that were not expected there either. But also, you know, I think there's benefits, if we split that into 2 categories, there's benefits we didn't expect at the beginning because of our unknown lack of knowledge of the particular industry. And we were surprised when we learned that the breadth of things people are doing is actually wider than we thought. So by the time you finish the project, you have overcome all the unknowns, which is great. And the others are examples where you reach production, you send machines out, and in the wild, there's just this whole new market for people who were trying to do something all along and thought no one was listening to them. And you unknowingly solve their problem as well. And we found that with our BIM models, actually, that people in Disney and Universal Studios were downloading our models, and we got in contact. We said, well, what are you doing with these models? And one team, I should say, were trying to plan emergency evacuation from a ride in Universal Studios in Shanghai using our machines, and they were trying to plan where the path needs to be and how can it be covered over with shrubbery so that the people who are on the ride can't see it. So they were using our models to plan all that. It was amazing. Yeah, really cool.
I remember doing some work with an organisation a few years ago called BIM for M2, which was a collection of manufacturers who were trying to grapple with the way they defined their individual products. I remember speaking to a door manufacturer, and that they'd, at great expense, created BIM models of their entire door range for rollout to the market. And they hoped that by architects using their BIM models in the design stage, that would translate through into further sales. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, that's not actually what happened. So despite the expense of creating a massive range of BIM door components, they weren't actually being used by the industry. What happened, though, was that the perception of their company amongst its potential customers changed. So they were seen as forward-thinking and efficient. And as the guy said to me, creating this door range has actually opened doors for our sales managers, metaphorically speaking. So what were some of the sort of perceptions of your business, do you think, James, have arisen from what you've been doing?
Well, you're absolutely hit the nail on the head when you said it, credibility. That I think, to be fair to our colleagues in industry, in the construction industry, the doors were always open, but sometimes it was more difficult to keep them open for long enough to have a meaningful conversation. And like I said earlier, it's completely understandable if you've got a chain of people coming from a different industry thinking they know what you want, and it's easy to disengage. With the BIM library, it really has given us credibility. That I think it allows people to see that we're not just talking the talk, but we walk the walk as well. But I think it's valuable to us that people can see that we don't think we know all the answers. We are trying to find them, but as things have modernized, it's become ever more important for us to work with peers in industry, in other industries, I should say, that the lines between industries have been blurred, and now with connectivity and data being shared between one and another, I don't think it's ever been as important. And we've been able to use the ontology plus that credibility to help us enter into those conversations, almost like a translator. We were able to learn that new language and get involved. It's been really great.
In a minute, I'm going to ask you what some of the uses have been of your BIM models, and I know the answer already because we talked about it. Before I do that, a question from David Stevens in the audience. What, in your view, are viable alternatives to diesel for running construction plant? I don't know if David's been watching the same YouTube interview with Lord Bamford, who seems to favour hydrogen. James, any thoughts on viable alternatives to diesel?
Say it's pretty far outside of my lane, so I'd be cautious to take what I say with a pinch of salt. I think there are an awful lot of challenges. It's difficult to look at battery technology and see it as the forever solution, particularly for large vehicles. In some cases, it's great that you carry around the mass of your power source at all times. For heavy machinery, they need a counterweight. You can just replace that with batteries. But in other cases, hydrogen is a more suitable solution because it can be refilled more quickly. But I think what we'll find with all of these is that doing it on one machine, whichever solution we look to, the infrastructure of getting the energy to the machine or the vehicle, whatever it may be, a car, an excavator, or an access platform, that will be the defining moment, I think, the one that decides what technology we go for. Because currently, the electric vehicle infrastructure is improving. But I think it's fair to say that when it comes to construction or even heavy industry, having electricity available where you need it to run these machines has some way to go. And it's the same for hydrogen. You know, you can have a hydrogen-powered car, but without the infrastructure to get that to easily accessible filling stations, it's going to be a difficult challenge. But I think, in my own opinion, regardless of what we choose, I think the infrastructure to get it from where it's generated to where it needs to be will be the big challenge. I know that's a bit of a cop-out for David.
No, if you had the answer, you'd be in great demand.
Yeah, I think no one has the answer yet.
Lord Bamford's view was that whereas in a typical family car, electric family car might be asked to operate for 30 hours a week, the limitations in terms of the time for which it can travel without recharging are relatively small. Whereas if you're going to ask a piece of plant to operate for 30 hours a week in heavy conditions, batteries are really difficult to sustain that level of flow through of work.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm aware of Lord Bamford's views. I've seen some of his interviews recently. It's a pretty compelling case. I think the infrastructure will be the big one. That will decide what we use rather than the other way around. What becomes the next fossil fuel will be decided on infrastructure, or the replacement for fossil fuel, I should say.
Yes. Note to self: find out if JCB have got digital BIM models of their product range.
They have.
So I know we talked, James, you and I, about some of the uses to which the models are being put in terms of logistics and actually helping make sure that exactly the right machine is used on a particular site for a particular job. Talk to me a little bit about that. And by the way, just before you do it, sorry to interrupt, James, please feel free, audience, as David did, type any questions. You'll find a Q&A chat box on the bottom right menu of your Zoom window. Please feel free to throw James any questions you like. Let's make him work for his lunch.
Yeah.
Sorry, James, I interrupted you about some of the uses.
Thanks for that, David. I appreciate that. No, we've. I should say that JCB have created their models, but I should also hasten to say that GLG, we were there first. We spurred the industry on. There were some ones and twos, but we were the first to come across with a full engineer and PLM controlled library, which was pretty exciting to be able to say that. To go back to your question then, David, I think now is probably a good time to show an example. So for everyone in the audience, I said there wouldn't be death by PowerPoint. There is one other slide that we'll jump to briefly, because I think it helps to illustrate, paint a picture very clearly using a fairly straightforward example of what we're talking about when we say people use BIM to help them ensure certainty. This is a glazing and cladding operation in a project at Battersea Power Station, which I'm sure all of you know is undergoing a substantial transformation and has been for the last few years. This particular operation used the GLG 1850 SJ, one of the very large machines that we have. And
I'm seeing a white, there we go. Sorry, James. Yes, the pictures have just come up. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. It's okay. And what you can see here is a JLG 1850. This is actually a screenshot from the BIM model. We're kindly given permission by the company to use it. It's pretty tight, so we didn't show anything that we shouldn't be showing. This is an 1850 SJ. It is on the roof of a 3-story basement, and the glazing and cladding operation takes place on this curved facade. It's concave and then convex, but it has got to get up and over this mezzanine area or mezzanine floor. And just so you have some idea of where it is in the building, these 2 arrows kind of show you from which direction we're looking at this point here, and on this top left image, just where that crane is positioned, that's where this machine is. And this company, they wanted to look at, can they optimize how they use their machines? And the top level question was, can we use a small number of larger machines or a larger number of smaller machines. And they did some analysis and found that by using the larger machines, they could cover a greater surface area of the facade without having to move the base of the machine. So this is the base of the machine, if anyone's curious. Every time you move that, it's a slow operation, but you've got to be pretty cautious with a machine this size. You know, it's a live construction site, there's a lot going on. So they found that it was optimal for them to use the larger machines and have 4 of them instead of, a larger number of smaller machines. And with that, they went on to some more detailed analysis, and they began asking, well, can it actually get off the truck? Can it fit through the gate? Can the surface sustain it? And it led very neatly to the civil engineer. They were actually mechanical engineer. This particular company has a small group of mechanical engineers within the civil engineering team that does this calculation and planning. They do some pretty detailed analysis. It's absolutely fascinating. Anything that puts people or things at height, they plan where it goes using some calculations, and yeah, it's amazing what they do. They interrogated the data that was inside the JLG model. So you can see on screen that, it's just the family types within the model. This is the Revit model. We refer to it as metadata, but it's often referred to Kobe data, etc. And they found that the maximum wheel load was just over 16 tons. But when they compared that to the floor, the basement roof, that the floor load was exceeded. Now, this is not an emergency. No soil had been broken at this stage. And they decided to make some calculations. What's their best way to go forward? And they had 3 options. The first was, should they backtrack and use the smaller machines? Should they proceed with the larger machines and backprop the basement floors to distribute the load more evenly? Or respec the concrete to take the point loading of this machine? And they decided to go with the latter. So they redesigned the concrete with some minimal changes and a pretty small cost implication. And all of this was done in the design phase. I suppose most interesting for us as JLG is that where previously the method statement would have said, use a 180-foot plus boom to do this job, it now became a JLG 1850 SJ, which was a pretty neat output of this, that we were named in the method statement. But because of the concrete being up-spec'd, we're also in the method statement for all the maintenance for the life of the building, which is pretty cool. But I think most important overall is not that JLG was on the method statement, it's really that pre these BIM models, this is before our competitors had their models out as well, pre these BIM models, our customers, this particular group, would not have had accurate information to make these decisions. And I have no doubt that if the machine got to site and they inspected it, they would have found that the max floor load would have been exceeded. And although nothing dangerous would have happened, it's still unplanned downtime and a change of plans when you're in live construction. So all this was being done. They changed the spec of the concrete with minimal changes to cost and no unplanned delays, all by being able to have access to this data.
Really great story there, James. And I think what really intrigues me about this is twofold. First of all, I worked on what I believe were the first 5D BIM projects in the UK some years ago now. And in order to create an accurate cost estimate and in order to create a realistic project program, it was important in some way or other that we embed temporary works and plant and equipment into that centralized model. And there was such a dearth of information and suitable models then that made that all but impossible. So that really ticks a big box for me. The other comment I'd make is that in the supply chain school, we have a very comprehensive set of offsite learning materials. I know because I spent 18 months creating a large part of those. And one of the things that really interested me was that we developed offsite learning material for designers, for cost consultants, for procurement, for logistics, for project managers and site managers. And in the pre-COVID days, we rolled out these workshops as we used to do in the live environment. And one of the most significant things to me was that so many people attended the logistics workshops. And I think people see in offsite and modern methods of construction that if we can't plan the logistics correctly, it can be the making or breaking of a project. So I think you're absolutely of the moment to be creating really useful digital data about the logistics in and around a construction project. So yeah, congratulations on that. I think it's marvelous.
Yeah.
So
well, now's probably a good time to share on following on from that.
Yeah.
We're absolutely fascinated by Offsite, and if anyone in the audience is interested or is willing to participate, we'd love to speak with you and see what we can do. Maybe using the BIM models we have. Are there new lines of data that you need in the metadata that will help you? Then let us know. Absolutely, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Likewise, in the supply chain school, one of the things I'm working on at the moment, or working towards, very shortly to be released by RIBA, a DFMA overlay to the RIBA plan of work, which I think is coming out in mid-September. DFMA obviously being at the heart of offsite and modern methods of construction. And one of the tasks I'm going through at the moment is to map the, well, first of all, I'm creating a revised training needs assessment. So those of you familiar with the school will know that in whatever subject matter you're interested in, somewhere on the school there will be a training needs assessment that you can fill in. In other words, respond to some plain language questions to give us an idea of the level of your knowledge on various aspects of offsite construction. And the wizardry in our website will then present you with a customized, personalized learning plan full of a variety of materials that actually address the shortcomings in your knowledge. And I'm currently mapping our content to a revised series of assessment questions. So again, appeals to the audience, if anybody has got some great examples of successful offsite projects, innovation in offsite, anything around offsite that you think would be of value to other people in the school, please do contact me on david@supplychainschool.co.uk. As we come into the final few minutes, if there are any more questions for James, please do type them into the comments. James, I'm going to ask you, I know that you work with a number of colleagues who you'd perhaps like to name check here.
Yeah. I think it's important in these things, and I'm the face that my face is the one that everyone in the audience sees. And there might be a subconscious assumption that I deserve the credit, but I don't. We've had Barry, Neil, Will, Kevin, Henry. They've been involved from day one, and we've had a lot of people involved as well. At various stages. This is definitely not the work of one individual, and they're the people that deserve all the credit. So it's we can't all be here to talk to BIM and our library to death, but they're the people that really deserve the credit.
And I'll say this because I know you wouldn't, James, and it would probably be risk embarrassing you slightly. I can't actually see our attendee list, but I am aware that James' work, as he's described, has come to the attention of some very senior people in the business in the US who may or may not be looking in on him now to see how well he's representing their company. So at that point, I'll just throw the forum open again to James or any final questions. But to sum up, James, what I'm seeing is you starting out by addressing a problem, and you've reaped the benefits that you expected and beyond. So what's been
without a doubt, yeah.
What have you learned from this experience personally?
I've learned that actually there's an awful lot that I didn't know. There's an awful lot that more to the industry than I ever thought was there. And the BIM project that we've talked about today was fantastic, but it really is the gift that keeps on giving. It's a phrase that's often used negatively, but it really is, man, it's just kept on giving, particularly with the Ontology. We're working on other projects now at Construction 4.0, digitization, etc. And the relationships we've built and the understanding we've learned from BIM has really allowed us to move into those areas with a much higher base level, but allowing us to move through with a bit more, well, a lot more effectiveness and understand what people are really looking for. We're much better equipped to ask the right questions now.
One of my other interests, as I said at the start, is in terms of digital adoption in construction industry. And indeed, we've released a huge amount of content on digital leadership and the business case for digital and so on. And one of the themes there is that it's really difficult for companies to make that initial investment because it's really difficult to measure an accurate return on investment. And companies who do commit to it very often find that they'll get not only the hopeful return on investment, but other returns that they hadn't anticipated. And that aligns precisely with the story you've told us today. I think what separates your story out, though, is that you actually had a pressing need to improve the efficiency of the business. You could see an inefficiency that needed to be tackled. So this, for me, was going to be a win-win project throughout.
Yeah. So, it turns out that there were even more wins. It's like win, 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 win. You know, absolutely. An example, you know, we created this library of models sympathetically for what could we need in the future that we may not know yet. And when we finished the library, about 18 months later, a team within the business started creating augmented reality apps. And we sent them our BIM library and said, look, go here. And you can start with those. They downloaded them, did some file conversion, and it's saved tens of thousands of dollars because they started with their BIM library and didn't create them again from scratch. And it seems to have happened over and over again. You know, our groups are planning our show stands of how our machines are going to be laid out. They do that with BIM models now as well.
Absolutely. I've got another two questions. One from Denise Lim for you, James. BIM interest level varies greatly in the environment where I work. Some people and departments think it's absolutely important, while others don't care at all. How do we close this gap? That's a really good question.
That was, I was probably somewhere in the middle of that, though not realizing it. I think we have to keep trying to show the people who don't see the value in it, that it can really affect what they're doing or make their lives a little easier. But in some cases, you know, people are not interested and they don't need to be interested, and that's fine. You know, we shouldn't try and push it on them. But there are people who could benefit from using BIM and using planning tools that BIM enables. I think if I was in your shoes, I'd probably try and speak their language, you know, try and employ this ontology. What are they trying to do? Because very often on the face of it, what they tell you their problems are, when you sit with them for an hour or two and actually watch what they're doing, work with them, ask some questions, the list of problems that you derive at the end will be different to the one that they gave you at the beginning. You know, humans are not great at frequency counting of, you know, what have my problems been over the last 5 years. We're pretty much a first in, last out, or first in, first out, excuse me, where, you know, what you heard most recently is actually what you convey as your biggest problem.
If I can,
I'd encourage you to try use ontology there.
Yeah. If I throw in my comment, Denise, just to remind people, the question was, BIM interest level vary greatly. And some people in departments think it's absolutely important, while others don't care at all. How do we close this gap? So Denise, over the last 15 years, I've been speaking to the industry about virtual construction and BIM and DFMA and so on. And in that time, I've probably addressed something like 2,000 people. And I absolutely understand your comment. I've been met with apathy, ambivalence, never full aggression yet, but you're right, some people just don't get it. So I think James has hit the nail on the head. If people can see that potential benefit, if they can visualize it, that's a great start. Another question I always tend to ask is, well, okay, if you don't embrace digital technology, where do you see you and your business in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years if you're not prepared to move on? Another question from Moz, where could they get hold of your library of components? And then the second follow-up from the same person, for educational purposes. That sounds like a guilty confession. I'm sure it's freely available, James.
Yeah, of course they are. I actually put them on a slide here. I wasn't planning to show it, but I'll stick them up there. You can, if you Google JLG BIM Store, it'll take you to the full library. We host on bimstore.co. We found that, you know, they have an incredible list of features. We've generated a lot of file formats that are for people outside of BIM. So Revit is the one that contains all the metadata, but we've got FBX, we've got OBJ, there's loads of them there. And our own website is jlg.com if you want to go and see some more about the machines. But definitely Google JLG BIM Store and you'll be away.
Okay, thank you. Comment from Liana. It's great to see JLG as a supplier being innovative and forward thinking. Thank you. Hope other suppliers across the industry follow your example of how in the industry we can adapt and change for the better. So a great comment.
Thanks, Liana.
Question there, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
one that I fully endorse, Liana. Great comment. If I may, before I thank James towards the end, I'm hoping that my colleague Naomi in a moment will give you a link to a feedback form, which we'd really like you to fill in to tell us whether or not you've enjoyed this session. It's really important. You know, the school is funded by its partners, and we need and like to report back to our partners on what we've done and how well or how badly we've done it. And we value your feedback so that we can improve what we do. I see Naomi has pasted that link in the chat box now. Penultimate thing, if I can do a shameless plug here, for those of you who are grappling with maybe in your own businesses the problems of digital innovation, just have a look at the new digital section on the Supply Chain School website. There is lots of content that can be specific to you if you fill in the training needs assessment. But specifically, I want to draw your attention to a specific course we've created for digital leaders that ends with the award of a digital leadership badge, albeit digital badge as it were. We are really interested in cohorts of 12 to 15 people. We've run the first 2, we have another 2 in the making, but we are looking to develop some more cohorts in the new year. So if you'd be interested in a formal course on becoming a digital leader and grappling with the problems of digital investment, making the business case for digital and understanding how best to implement digital innovation, either contact myself or my colleague Naomi. It's both of us, first name at supplychainschool.co.uk. And I think because my voice is fading rapidly and there are no more questions, I'd really like to thank James and Hesse for today's presentation. James and I, and indeed Naomi, have been discussing the content of this event for some weeks now, and it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to James and seeing his passion for innovation and his enthusiasm for his company. It's really exciting, very heartwarming to see that, James. And I know
thank you very much, David and Naomi, for your help.
He was very nervous about today's presentation, but I think I've been delighted with the way you've delivered, James, and I hope you, the audience, have too. So I'm going to give you 6 minutes of your life back, all of you. Thank you very much for attending. Please keep your eye on the website for future events. And James, thank you once again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, David and Naomi. Bye.
Thanks, bye.